some of the things that can kind of go wrong with this. So let's see, where should I put? I'll put this in the threads package, because that's kind of what this is about. Threads, interclasses, whatever. All right, so first what we're going to do is I'm going to create something called a JPanel, and it's going to be basically, I'm going to call it the timer panel. And the way that Swing works is it has a number of different components, and we can kind of put them inside each other and put them in various places. One of the main components where you kind of put stuff is a panel. In fact, if you look at NetBeans, and I'm not sure of the exact way it's being done here, but we see this piece right here, that's like a little tree that shows the various classes. We have the editor thing right here. We have this, which is going to produce some of the output. We have another one here. These are all probably some form of a JPanel. In other words, it's a separate object that's been kind of laid out in the frame here. So again, one of the main uses of inheritance is that we extend existing classes, either in Java or in a third-party application. So in this case, JPanel is something where we can put a bunch of components into this panel. Now, and the panel itself isn't going to be the window. The window is going to be something else called a JFrame. But now this is just a regular old class, and we can have stuff in here. So one of the things that we're going to have in here, we'll use them as instance variables. So we'll have a JLabel, and this will be, let me call it current time label. Okay. Again, JLabel is a Swing component that basically just displays things. It can display text, it can display images. Oops. So again, what we will do is, the first thing is we're going to instantiate it. Oops, current time label is new JLabel. Label. And if we look, we can see an overloaded constructor. Again, all concepts we've talked about. So we can actually give it an image or an icon, actually, or we can give it text. We're just going to deal with text now, because dealing with images is sort of something else. And so let's, since this is supposed to be the current time, let's just sort of give it this string. Okay, so JLabel wants a time. Now, what we can then do, and NetBeans is going to maybe complain about it, but so all we've done is we've created this label, but we haven't done anything to it. When I say add, what that's going to do is that's going to add this label to my panel. And now I also want a button. So I'm going to call it toggle timer button, because I believe that describes what it's going to do. What it's going to do is going to turn things on and off. And so, again, I've just defined it, but I need to instantiate it. All right, now I'll say, okay, what am I putting here as a string? Again, there are the JButton constructor is overloaded. Again, I can give it an icon, I can give it text, I can text and an icon, again, just text here. Okay, so I can add it. And, oh, it's sort of complaining. That complaint we can kind of ignore. It says we should make these final. That's probably a good idea because we're not going to change those instances. We're going to change what they say. Okay. Now, just to kind of see what this looks like, I'm going to, well, no, let me back off. I will. Yes, yeah, I have two competing things. I haven't gotten to what the purpose of this is yet, but the second competing criterion is that whenever you're doing anything, as soon as possible, you want to be testing it. And so I've done a little bit of code here. The first thing I want to do is I want to test it before I move forward, because if I've screwed something up here, I want to pick it up early. So what I'm going to do is create my main class. So I'm going to call it test timer panel. And again, here, so here's how we're going to display this. We're going to display this in something called a JFrame. And again, JFrame, we have lots of different things. One of the things that we can typically give to a JFrame is its title. So okay, so that's the title. Now, the thing about frames is that, well, I'm going to do some stuff that we'll explain later. Okay, so I'm setting the default close operation. Okay, so now I want to add my timer panel. Okay, so that's the class I just created. So that's going to be a timer panel, and I want to add that to, now the thing with these JFrames, they're fairly complicated, but I don't add stuff directly to the frame. I add it to something called the content pane. And again, we'll talk more about this next time. And I want to add it, okay, let me add it to the south, just because that's, all right. So what I've done is I've instantiated this timer panel class that I've just created. I've added it to the frame. This is how I always add it via the content pane. There are kind of reasons for that. And then if I want to display it, again, this is where that graphics thread thing kind of comes in. There's a special way to do that, and that special way is using something called swing utilities. And it has a method called invoke later, and that ensures that it's going to work with the graphics thread correctly. However, what I need to do is I need to give it a runnable. Now here's the thing. This is the one exception to this is the one exception to anonymous inner classes that. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm creating an anonymous inner class of type runnable, and again, it's complaining, and it just says implement all abstract methods. Okay, so that now. So what I'm doing here, is I'm actually creating a runnable class here on the fly. It's anonymous because I haven't given it a name. And this is the one exception to that, not allowing anonymous interclasses. The author likes these lambda expressions that we haven't talked about. That's kind of an alternative to this. Why does he like it? Because it would save some typing here. I don't think that's a good reason, to be honest, but let's see if that'll, okay. There, that looks a little, what are you complaining about? There. All right, so what this will do, set visible true, what do you suppose that does? It's going to set it visible. All right, let's see what this does. This isn't going to do what I want, but it will kind of point the way to what I want, all right? All right, there it is. That's it, believe it or not, because there's the thing. All right, so they say, okay, what was missing? What's missing is if I don't tell it how big to make it, it's going to just make it of 0 by 0 pixels. All right. So instead, what I need to do is I just need, and I could put this either here or I could put it in here. Some people like to put it in here. I like to just set it up entirely. Okay, so we can set the size according to the width. Let's make it, I think, at 400, which should be enough, and 200. And now when I run it, it will appear at a reasonable size. And it's always good, by default, it's going to be up in the upper left-hand corner. Why? Because the coordinates of these, remember in your math classes how coordinates work, X, Y? Well, in computer graphics, they turn it upside down. So X goes this way and Y goes down. So 0, 0 is kind of up here. So if I want to, basically I want to put it somewhere. Let's put it somewhere else. And I can do that by setting location. And let's set it at 300. 300. These are all in pixels. Y'all know what a pixel is, right? Yeah. Have you had the graphics class yet, or you are taking it, or are going to take it? So you've seen a lot of this stuff. All right. So now we run it. It's right here, and see, now we can kind of click this thing, but it's not doing anything, and the display is just kind of sitting there. Okay. So but it's showing up. So that's that's what we wanted. Now we're ready to do what I wanted. The first thing is to so within the timer panel, notice that that's the constructor. So here's this is the scope of the class. Remember, scope in Java is defined by curly braces. So the scope, this is the class. So within the scope of that class, I am, let me call it just a timer. It's not going to be a timer, that's runnable. Okay, so this is just a regular old class. It's implementing runnable. That's because this is where the thread is going to be going. And so run is going to be what happens with that. Now, here's the thing with this, is that I want, there are a couple of parameters that I want. One is I want the time between the updates. So I'll call it update time. I want a Boolean that's going to say whether I'm running or not. So if running is false, then it's just sort of sitting there. If it's true, then it's going to be if it's true, it's going to be, the thread's going to be operating. Okay, so again, this is a regular old class. And so I want to write a constructor for it. And that constructor can be public or whatever. Because the class is private, it means that nobody outside this class can ever really get a reference to the class, so they can't instantiate it. So public doesn't hurt. All right, so actually, tell you what, I'll pass in what the update time is and set running to false. Again, just, and running we don't want to make final because we're going to change it. The update time we can make final, that's okay. All right, so now while we're running, what we're going to do, okay, so first, this is kind of how we're going to check to see whether we're running or not. So while we're running, we will we're going to sleep for the update time. And then, okay, now remember the concept of scope. Because this class, this inner class, is within the scope of this outer class, the timer panel, it has access to the to this label. And so what I'm going to do is this is I'm going to set its text to be a new that's not how I get a new one. I get a local date time now toString. Now there's actually a nicer way to format it. All right, and then our sleep is going to this interrupted exception. That's okay. So basically what's going to happen is as long as we're running, that's going to go on. Now the thing is that now what's going to change running? Well, we need to give it access. So I will encapsulate this. That is to write a setter, and a getter is not. Okay, so let's put it to the last method of this. Okay, so a set and a get. So just let's, okay, so now to test this out, what I will need is one of these executor services. Remember, that's how we're going to work with our threads. So over here, again, as an instance variable, this is a case where I just want a single thread executor. Did it say? Yeah, okay. So single thread executor. And so the other thing that I need to do is I need to now I've defined this class, but I haven't instantiated it. So I'll do I can do that within here. And let's do it every second. So the argument to the thread sleep is in milliseconds. And again, just to test it, And then just to test it, we're going to set it running, executor service. We're going to submit it to the okay. So submitting this runnable to executor service will cause it to start. So now the button, I'm not doing anything with the button yet, but what this should do is now when I run it, I should see, I don't know if you can you see it, how the times are updating now. Why? Because the thread is running. And now this doesn't do anything, but if this were on the graphics thread, then it would be blocking that. I don't have time to show that. Maybe next week I can show that. But okay, do you see that? Because it's running in a separate thread, the graphics thread is now free to do its thing, and the thread scheduler is taking care of all that. Okay, so you see that? So in other words, this is live. So the one thing that we now want to also do is the main way of responding to things that the user clicks on is through this thing called ActionListener. We've seen one example when we were illustrating interfaces. Again, that's another interface, and one of the most effective ways I've found of working with that is that now what we want is we want the button to turn things on and off. In other words, we want the button to kind of basically do what we were doing up here. Okay, so let's define another class, which is going to be, we'll call it toggle timer action listener. And it's going to implement this action listener implements the action listener interface, which has a single method called action performed. And what we want to do with that action performed is, okay, so now what this is going to need to do is get access to the instance of this timer runnable. So up here I created this as a local variable, but instead what I need it to do is be an instance variable. Okay, so now I don't want that, but I now have an instance variable, and as an instance variable, this inner class has access to that. So what do we want to do is we basically want to toggle it. So if the timer runnable set running, not timer runnable is running. Okay, yes?
Isn't that also a good example for an anonymous inner class?
Pardon me?
Isn't that also a good example for an anonymous inner class?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing.
The action listener.
Yes.
Could I use this also as an anonymous?
You could, but you shouldn't.
But there is also one method I have to override. It's also used for one case, so.
Bad idea. I'll talk about this next week, but it's actually a bad idea, and I'll talk about why next time. Again, anonymous inner classes in general are evil. You should not use them. People do lots of evil things. There is evil in this world. Okay, so now, if the timer runnable, if it's running, then what we want to do is we want to take our executor service and submit our timer runnable to it. So in other words, first we're going to flip it, and now we say, okay, if having flipped it, we're now running, we're going to now start it off. Now the only thing that's missing here is we need an instance of that, which is the call that? A toggle timer action listener. And I need to add that as an action listener to the timer, toggle timer button, add action listener to my listener. Now, it should be, okay, now when it starts up, now notice that the label is not changing because we haven't started it. But when I click this, it now starts running. And then when I click it again, it stops. Okay, so by clicking it, how did I stop it? I stopped it by, notice that the condition here was I put this in a while loop, and then once the running flipped to false, it flipped out of this while loop and exited. And because I'm using a single thread, what the executor does, the executor is just using one single thread to handle this. So notice when I toggle it again, it starts up again, maybe with the delay because there's that 1 second delay. And I toggle again and it stops. Okay, so that's inner classes. So I was able to get through all of that. The usefulness of inner classes is that they're kind of like instance variables on steroids because they're not only like variables, but they do stuff. And we're doing simple stuff here. So, okay, so I've taken 2 of your minutes, but that means that you still owe me 3 because I hit the 5 from this one.